Welcome to Try This at Home. I'm Cliff Baumgartner.
And I'm Harrison Stewart.
This week we are talking about Mythbusters, Season 1, Episode 9. Our myths are lightning strikes, tongue piercing, tree cannon, and beat the breath test. This episode originally aired November 11th, 2003, directed once again by Peter Reese. Harrison, last week, we had a bit of an anomaly. We had our first real Season 1 episode that we did not like.
Indeed.
We were wondering if the show was going to rebound. What were your overall thoughts on this one?
We're back, baby.
I know, it's so good. It's so, we talked after last week. We're like, oh, it's actually nice to have something to disagree with the show on. It really adds some dimension to the podcast. I don't know how often that's ever going to happen.
Nope.
The show is just so good.
3 for 3. And also, I thought, I kept looking at the clock because I was like, they still have a whole nother myth to cover.
Yeah.
With the remaining 7 minutes. How are they gonna? And then they're like, oh, just a quick drive-by. I was like, oh, excellent.
But it worked.
Big time.
And it was another sequence of mini myths, which we've been seeing more and more of later in this season.
Yeah.
And we've seen it work like it did with this and with the microwaves. And we've seen it really not work like it did with Cola last week. This one I thought was great. And it was just the right amount of time. It was just interesting enough, but they didn't try to stretch it. It was great.
It's also, there's a decent amount of inflicting Jamie and Adam on other people outside of the Mythbusters range. And I loved that.
Letting the normies in.
Oh, it's great. Because again, they don't know who these guys are. So they're just like, oh, wow. So you're just very strange, aren't you? It's
At one point, the cop is actually like, you sit over there and don't say anything.
Well, bad enough having to deal with one of you, but with two.
He understood Adam so quickly.
Oh,
it's just immediately.
He was like, you're a troublemaker. I was like, you're not wrong.
I thought this episode also had a really important first in it.
Oh.
Not a first appearance, not a new character, not a new Mythbuster. I think this is our first real Mythbusters mega explosion.
I think you're right.
This
one
was
seen massive.
This level of destruction yet on Mythbusters. Even Jado Rocket Car, it was a big bomb, but it didn't explode like this.
It wasn't a literal bomb, which this one definitely was.
Yeah.
But therein lies my first note. You gotta save it.
Yeah.
You gotta save it. The fact, you can let me know that there is a big boom incoming.
Yeah.
Without showing me that big boom.
Yeah.
And they showed it really early and twice.
So I did have some thoughts about that, and maybe we'll get there when we get to that part of the episode about the way things are structured right now, because we talked about that last week of why not hold this? Why is this in this order? I have some thoughts. Maybe we can get into that as we go. Myth 1, lightning strikes tongue piercing. Will a tongue piercing attract a lightning strike?
Okay, so one thing that I'll take the blame. I've forgotten is to register what our guesses are.
I was going to ask at the top, because this one really has I feel like we haven't had a good question in a while that you could answer that way. So this one does give us an opportunity.
Well, and I think with this one, I was sold on it.
Yeah.
But I should point out that I have a strange relationship to lightning and thunderstorms.
Okay.
In that, growing up, I was taught to be deathly afraid of them.
Same.
Oh, really? Okay.
I wonder if that's a Southern thing.
Could be. I think at least part of it was that we had a family friend or something that got there usually was some sort of associated story when this intense fear was instilled.
Right.
But I the main one that I remember just being terrified of was taking a shower.
During a thunderstorm?
To
this day, I won't do it.
I've seen your bathroom. It's so far into the building.
I know.
It's so funny imagining what would need to happen in order for that lightning to go through the maze of a home and then just be, I gotcha.
Well, I think that's part of what makes this myth so good is that lightning is both really scary and also really elusive and hard to understand. And also hard to capture on camera, it turns out.
Oh,
we'll get there.
Yeah.
But unpredictable. You don't really know. It's this very big, scary thing, but it's It's like if suddenly things could just spontaneously combust. Like fire is scary, but
Cliff,
at least
they can.
Oh God, don't give me another thing to worry about. I have enough anxiety as it is.
This week on Mythbusters.
It's like fire is scary, but at least like, okay, we have methods of controlling it. Lightning is just chaotic in nature and you're screwed.
Yeah.
It's terrifying.
It never does the same thing, like it's as we find out in this myth. I mean, that's if there is a takeaway from this myth, it's just like, oh, you can't predict what lightning's gonna do. It's just
This was interesting up top because it actually opened with a real video of the incident in question, which we haven't really seen. It hasn't.
I thought that as well.
In my memory, when Twitter becomes a thing, the show gets a lot more responsive to stuff that's recently happened. But at this point in the show, that wasn't as easy to do. But this was actually a story. They said it was from August 2003,
which makes it recent.
Makes it very, very recent because this aired in November of 2003. So they're getting pretty.
Oh my
quick.
gosh, yeah. So they're reacting to something that just happened.
And I did do a little bit of research. This is a real story.
Ooh.
It's a guy named Matt Thompson. He was, I believe, 17 years old, and he did get struck by lightning. The weird thing about it, I found a couple of articles from the time, from like his local newspaper or whatever, and one of the articles did mention that his tongue piercing got blown out.
Yes.
But none of them, there was no buzz that I could find around was the tongue piercing the cause.
Interesting.
So I think that might have either that was kind of like a chat room thing that was going around at the time, or that might have been a bit of producing wizardry to go, hey, there's a story in the news. Can we pull a myth out of that and find a way to like respond to something kind of in real time?
Yeah.
Because that, at least in what I found, that wasn't part of it. But
well, it doesn't even sound that implausible on the face of it.
No.
I mean,
no.
It's metallic. You did get struck by lightning, and that was the only thing that seemed to get like blown off your body. I mean, it's fine. I mean, it sounds a little silly, but not that much.
No, it's really not that ridiculous. I mean, one of my first notes was just like, what a great myth. It's just that idea. We talked about this a little bit last week with the hammer drop of like, you immediately understand the science, even if you don't know the exact parameters. You know what you just said, which is, I don't know, lightning likes metal. You got metal in your mouth, man. That seems bad. Yeah. I don't want to do that. So great setup. And then they immediately use the phrase that Jamie had to make a lightning generator. And I was like, I'm in. I'm back. Mythbusters
Tell me
is
no
the best
more.
Show.
Yeah.
I'm here.
Jamie Tesla is just fine by me.
Yes. We get a lot.
Nikola Heinemann.
This episode is like just packed full of great Adam and Jamie making weird stuff.
Yes, and it's also just packed full of them being so uniquely them.
Yes.
Like whether that be like, oh, we need medieval carpentry tools, and Jamie being like, oh, absolutely. Let me just go out to the farm real quick. And
just whip those up.
Yeah. I don't have to keep my shirt on though, do I? I was really, we can get to it, but I was really hoping the beret would stay on. Just because I like the line, the beret stays on.
Or just the beret. That's it.
Yes.
Instead of the fig leaf from a few episodes ago, it's just a beret that's been added in post.
Yes.
I'm into that.
It's there all the time.
They had a sequence of, I mean, this whole thing of Adam making a mold of his head and doing the vacuum forming. All I could think of was it feels like Tested. You see this early glimpse of what Adam now does so well on YouTube. I actually watched this episode, and then like in the background when I was working today, I had a Tested episode on, and I was like, wow, it's been 20 some years, but it's the same. Like it's so great to see that. It's been entertaining to watch Adam build cool stuff for 20 some years. Like it's so cool.
Well, and then immediately, similar to last week, we get one of the cast members unnecessarily putting themselves not in harm's way per se, but you didn't need to do that.
Well, that was file under things they absolutely did not have to do.
Yeah.
Adam gets a tongue piercing.
Adam gets a tongue piercing.
Now, you last week had a lot of reactions to the buried alive, and especially Jamie himself actually being buried.
Yes.
I was not that disturbed by that. This is what got me.
I feel the exact opposite. Where I was like, this was fun enough that I was like, yeah, put him through a little pain. That's fine.
have a really weird, like, it's not even a needle phobia. It's like I don't like skin. The idea of a piercing or like skin being pierced or ripped or anything freaks me out.
That is fascinating
Yeah.
because I have no piercings. Like I don't know, but I don't want to say it looked pleasant, but it certainly didn't like the entire time I was kind of gauging like, is this something I could do?
Yeah.
And like I was like, she's so calming, and
She was
you
great.
got a little like clamp thing
Yeah.
that kind of like makes sure that the hole is where it's supposed. I mean, it all looked very like by the books. Like, oh yeah, sure. I guess that's not as complex as in my head I made it
Totally.
out.
No, it turned out not to be nearly as bad as I thought it was going to be or in my memory, but just as they were setting it up and it was a piercing, I just felt myself like, oh, I don't want to see it.
Now, here's something that I did notice is that like it's not just he doesn't just get a stud. He gets a barbell.
Yeah.
Like he gets a big cuss.
He can
in
barely
there.
talk afterwards.
It's really funny. I should have that should have been the clip. But the I don't know what I was expecting.
I know.
But I do wonder if they picked something that big. Like, did they do it because it was funny, or is that the type of piercing that this gentleman had, the one in the myth?
It seemed like they specifically were calling it a stud, and I think they specifically wanted something big. It was also the same piercing that they were going to test with on the ballistics gel head. So maybe they wanted that to look the same.
It was just big.
It was.
I mean,
yeah.
like I know plenty of people that have tongue piercings, and it also could have been that it was just done, but like he can't talk.
Yeah.
Like I mean,
Yeah,
it's like,
no.
okay, good, now it's all done. Like that is like as close as he can get, and I was
Yeah.
like, I don't recall ever noticing that. Like, oh, this person can't talk.
It's also way funnier to make him do a big one.
Oh,
so.
it's 10 times funnier. I mean, because he can't even like hardly open up his mouth without that sucker just like clanging everywhere on the inside.
It is funny that the show has gotten to this where they just are doing things adjacent to the myth, but that they just know are weird and funny and make it like when they jumped out of a plane and dropped pennies everywhere. And it's just like, that has nothing. And this is the same thing. You don't have to get a tongue piercing, but you know, it's going to be funny to watch Adam go through it.
See, and that's why I was cool with it. Like to me, this was the opposite of the buried alive because they were not in like serious danger.
Right.
Like that's where it's funny to put them through the ringer.
Yeah.
It's not funny to be mere inches from death. That's concerning.
Yeah. I think it was my own phobia that made it just like, hard to watch, but it is.
So you're getting one next week.
Yeah, exactly. I
can't wait.
can't wait. It's going to be.
I'm Cliff Bundergun.
Welcome to Tired at Home. We also got, while we're talking about, the great building sequences, the methodology on this one was really cool.
Yeah, I loved it.
Very simple. They lay it out at the beginning, make two heads, put a stud in one, have a lightning generator.
And that thing is the most like picturesque, straight out of a science fiction like movie.
It is like where every third act fight in an 80s like martial arts movie ended in that building.
Yes, exactly.
It's so good.
And to see it work. Like that's the thing, is that usually something that looks that silly is a prop, and then just like zap.
It works perfectly. Yeah.
Okay.
I thought it was a really neat idea, and it was one of those great moments of like
the control.
Well, yeah, the way they made the control, and that through their testing, you get a better understanding of, like, you start to feel like, oh, maybe I understand this the way they do, of actually building the rigs that would themselves be neutral and not attract lightning.
Yeah.
So that the only effect would come from the difference between the two heads, which was the stud or ultimately the doorknob. We'll get there.
Yeah.
It was great. It was a great breakdown. It was what we talked about in previous episodes of wanting to see more of that, wanting to see more of the actual science and like doing it piece by piece of how this is going to come together and leading us down that road, down that story. And I thought it was great here.
And continually doing it. Like that was the thing, is that we had like the biggest data set of almost any other myth, where it was like they really tried every way that they could think of to give this a reasonable doubt. And after they failed to do so, called it busted.
And ramp it up and make it ridiculous too.
I loved that.
Great.
I loved that. Like that's textbook myth. But I also found it funny where it, like, there were several moments in this episode where it sounded like the narrator was about to say science. Like, they're willing to put themselves in harm's way in the name of myth busting. You know, it was
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
I mean, it's still science. I would call this science.
I think the show is finding its science roots. Like there is actually a part I remember later. I remember the sign of warning science content, which would become a joke on the show of like, we're going to break something down scientifically.
Yeah.
I wonder if at this point in the show, I mean, it goes back to one of the questions we've had from the beginning. Like, what was the pitch?
Yes.
What did they think the show was at this point in time? And I wonder if they even knew while they were doing it how science heavy the show was, or if it was more word. Because you also have things like Buried Alive where they spent no time trying to analyze it scientifically. So it's like, I wonder if that was just a natural thing that came off of having to test more scientific things. And then they saw, ooh, this actually the scientific method is a great structure. Like it's a great narrative structure and they can lean into that or not.
Well, I wonder, and I do wonder what role fans played in that of like telling them that, no, we really like the science parts because like, I don't know, I would think that it would be the opposite, that a show would start very science heavy and then show you the cool stuff. And then over time they'd be like, oh, we need to, you know, that gets smaller and smaller. And it seems to be the opposite with the show where it's like that's what they will eventually like expand into. Like, I mean, later they put forth some pretty robust experiments. So I'm like, that's like foolproof.
It's really great forward thinking from the show, from Adam and Jamie, from the producers, from everybody to understand. And this is why there have been a lot of Mythbusters imitators over the years that haven't lasted. And I feel like it's largely because they focused on the explosions, the cool stuff, the cars, the this, the that, and you run out of road there. Like there's only when you're blowing stuff up and when the thrill is blowing stuff up, eventually you can't blow up anything bigger, right? You're gonna run out of stuff. Whereas this using the science to really dig in and tell stories is what made Mythbusters a 14 season, masterpiece.
It becomes the sequel problem,
exactly.
Right? Is that everything has to be bigger, better, bolder than
crazier,
what came before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mythbusters kind of found a way, and it is cool to see them. I feel like early on, even though this episode has a huge explosion in it, figuring that out and realizing, oh, okay, let's be forward thinking. If this is going to last, we've got to do better than just, it's a cool high-speed shot, it's a cool explosion, it's a cool car, whatever.
Yeah, it doesn't, I'm pretty surprised at this juncture how it doesn't feel samey yet.
No.
Like there have been some very similar types of things that they're testing for, similar results, similar shots, and what have you. It hasn't worn off.
Yeah.
And I'm really interested at what point it does and how the show responds to that, reacts to that.
That's a really great point. I mean, I wonder, we'll find out, but I wonder if that's also part of bringing in the other Mythbusters and bringing in these other perspectives, because it's Adam and Jamie's weirdness I think is part of what makes it not all feel samey, because these guys are going to do something nobody else would do. So I'm actually really excited to see down the road when we get Carrie and Grant and Tori and other people, like how their unique perspectives start to twist what Mythbusters is too. Like it's, the evolution of this show is so fun to see in real time.
Yeah.
Even though I'm obviously jumping ahead with the other Mythbusters, but even right now, it's like it's cool to see that evolve.
Well, but I have to imagine that I'm probably not the only one. I have to imagine that there are listeners out there that are like me, that if they're going through it with us, this is the absolute closest that they've gotten to seeing it in any kind of like sequential order.
Right.
I mean, it's always been reruns. Like I don't even know that I've consciously ever seen an episode of Mythbusters when it was out. It was like the perfect sick day show, because it was just on for like 5 hours. Like by the time that I was really watching it regularly, there were like 10 seasons.
Yeah.
So like there was so much content that they could just do rerun and rerun and rerun. So I'm two things make that interesting. One, we can watch the development in a way that I've never even really thought about, because I've mostly just experienced the finished product. But I'm also interested to see the duds
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
I mean, so far, really, I mean, I wouldn't even consider last week a dud. It was not as good, I would think, but it was also, I'm interested to see the ones that didn't get rerun.
Yeah.
Reran? I think it is rerun.
Rerun?
I think it is. There's weird rules about ED. We don't need to get into all that.
That's a different show.
Yeah.
So in the actual methodology here, when they actually get into the test, this was also interesting in the sense that ultimately their result is going to be pretty inconclusive.
Yeah.
And in past episodes, that's been frustrating or felt like, oh, that's kind of a letdown. In this one, I think they walked you through the science of it so much and you knew each of the component pieces that even though this test doesn't really get them anywhere ultimately to busting the myth or not, it's still fascinating and you're kind of right there with them. And I didn't mind the fact that we don't really end up with anything definitive.
No, but I think at least part of that for me was because the conclusion was that like lightning is just unpredictable, and it's so unpredictable that there's only so much that we can do to even put constraints on the thing.
Lightning's weird, man. It's basically the end result. Yeah.
But they proved that. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
they ran it through enough times that by the time they're like, we got to call this quits, I'm like, oh, I would. You ran that through like 8 times.
Yeah.
Like, that's enough. And they like switched the heads and the positions.
Smart control.
I loved that.
Very good
that.
one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also like as they're going, and they're like shooting sparks at it and stuff, they're like adding more piercings is one of the things that they do.
At one point, just a bolt in the guy's mouth.
At one time, it's just a bolt in his mouth.
Doorknob.
At the end, it's a doorknob. Yeah, it's a full-on doorknob. And the lightning seemed to like the doorknob, which didn't make me feel super safe.
Yeah. Yeah.
But then again, I mean, these aren't metal. They can't be, right?
These are metal.
These are metal?
Yeah. If it starts lightning, get the hell away from the door. Turns out.
Hide in the shower. It's not safe there either.
Definitely don't put your face right next to the doorknob. I don't know why you would, but just.
And especially if you have a tongue piercing. Don't
if it stacks, man.
I really thought that the metal was going to make far more of a difference than it did. I mean, like it had to be a silly amount of metal for it to make any kind of difference. Like the lightning did seem to be slightly favoring it, but not in any sort of significant degree.
Yeah.
It just seemed to favor the positioning, you know?
It did seem to favor the positioning, which I thought was good. It was good that they switched things around, but it did seem to go to that right side a lot. Was a note that I had, but I guess we probably didn't see all of their tests, so I would assume that they were able to rule that out. The one question that I had, to the best of my recollection and my notes, I don't think they talked about this, was obviously the human body has electrical currents running through it. It has a lot of reasons that lightning would be attracted to you anyway. I don't know how you measure this. I don't even know that I have the right terminology, but it's like, is a tongue piercing, even the big one like they had in Adam, it's not bigger than you are as a person, right? It's not more attractive, I would imagine, than how you are already attractive to lightning. Because they did put them like, they tried to represent the electrical properties of a human body and et cetera. So I just wonder if the natural human properties that make your body attractive to a lightning strike just outweigh a small piece of metal.
That's fair. I can't say that I've ever thought about it. I do think. Okay. Well, I mean, it has to do with the terminology that they're using, right? Lightning rod. We know what that is. We know that it's like a spot that draws lightning, usually on a building or something like that.
Yeah.
Like to a specific spot. I almost think we were like primed to think that it has to be this thing.
Right.
That's drawing it. It can't be. But then again, I have no idea how, like you were saying, how would you test that?
Yeah. And they also didn't talk about.
Don't zap Jamie. Stop that.
Put him in a casket and then zap it with lightning. He'd be like the Undertaker.
He would probably make no noise and then just be like, it tickles. You know?
Tickles a little bit.
Yeah.
Made my mustache bristle.
I just imagine like sparks coming off it. It's like, It's a little hot in here, but besides that, I'm doing all right.
The one other thought I had watching the test, because the test was fascinating. I mean, you're watching this lightning generator zap these heads. It's every bit as cool.
We're imagining it.
Well, that's kind of my thing is the one thing is I would have loved to have seen this a little bit later with better camera technology.
Oh, but Cliff, it gave us the best. It could well be that my HBO was just messing up, but the way it presented the scene to me, and I took it back to make sure, because I was like, there's no way that just happened. They're like, take a look at that again on the high-speed camera, and then it's just like a picture of a black room, and then they move on. It's not. I was like, what was I looking at?
Yeah, there's like a brief like flash of white, and you're like, all right, I don't.
Maybe I blinked twice. I don't know, but I didn't see it either time.
Yeah.
And I was just so amused by that.
That did make me think later years with better high-speed cameras, imagine how cool that would have looked.
I can't stop imagining. Sometimes I just look up videos of like high-speed lightning. It's one of the best looking things.
It's so satisfying. It's so
ever.
cool. Yeah.
And yet they can't make a good Flash movie. Wild. I don't get it, man.
Take that, Zaslav. Yeah. But the results on this ultimately, as we said, kind of busted, but ultimately inconclusive because lightning's weird and they didn't really.
But that was a fine conclusion.
Yeah, it was
again,
an honest conclusion.
They did prove that much,
Yeah,
you know?
right.
I felt well sated that lightning weird, man.
And they took us on that journey to where I wasn't going, yeah, but what about that? It was, as I was right there with them. Like I said, my only note on this was I would just love to see it redone with slightly better technology and like testing methods later on because it's so cool. I would love to see that on high speed. I would love to see the ways that they would have come up, with to do it later. But all in all, really enjoyed this one.
We could have done this 1,000 times and still not gotten that same result. Lightning is just really unpredictable.
Myth 2, tree cannon.
Yes.
So this is a very cool myth. It is more of a story myth, as we have come to know the show likes to do. And they tell the story about a Hungarian village that made a cannon out of a tree overnight. And then when firing the cannon...
It takes a village.
...at their enemies... the cannon blows up and wipes out like half the town.
Aww.
Wah, wah.
Wah, wah.
So really the question here is, and they get into this as it goes on. I wasn't clear about this particularly at the beginning, but as it goes on, it's not just can you make a cannon out of a tree. It's can you make a cannon out of a tree overnight using methods from the time, because that's ultimately what they say busts the myth.
Right.
And then it's what would happen if a tree cannon catastrophically explodes.
Yes.
Which that was never in question to me.
Historically, I'm not great at understanding what we're testing for.
Right.
As I've proven several times over the past few weeks. But my understanding of this one was that we were testing if the story is plausible. So that involved, because we are I didn't know, but apparently one knows that tree cannons are a thing,
right?
Are a historical thing that have been used surprisingly recently in warfare. They said like 100 years ago,
right? It was so weird. Yeah,
it was like 1900.
We had metal at that point.
Yeah, we had metal, man. We were like so close to making machine gun metal.
Yeah,
but there was that point, and then I guess the other one was that like would or could you cause a big enough internal explosion within that cannon to like wipe out a lot of people nearby? Which it seems like the second one was like, well, yeah, I mean, if you put enough explosives damn near anything, it will go boom. I think.
And that's why I was saying they really did end up focusing on the overnight part of it, because that was a big part of the story.
Yes.
And I actually think my kind of overall note with this myth was I think it's entirely plausible
I do too.
that it happened. It's just this specific story of making it overnight, and that's where the
See-
mythology kind of enters into the mix.
Yes. And also, okay, we should also note that a big part of this was that this was just a setup to have them use medieval tools to accomplish this task. Like that was
Yes.
the draw of this myth,
Totally.
right? Was the fact that like not only were they saying, can we do this with like the carpentry available in this time? In
Again,
this
the
place.
build sequences. It was so good all throughout
It
this
was
episode.
amazing. I feel like this episode ends up being one that they draw a ton of like visuals from.
Oh,
for,
the
like,
cannon
smash
blowing up
cuts
was
and-
in like
oh,
opening credits forever.
I definitely remember that. Some of the drunk ones later
Yes.
give us some very good lines. But the thing about this one is that I didn't need any more. Like there was about halfway through it, I was like, I'm totally cool to watch them just make this. Like I'm really not as interested in the outcome of this one as I am in the journey.
Yeah.
You know, like
Yeah.
this one was very journey oriented and I appreciated that. Although I do think, so I think it's when they get to the cannonball. Well, we should do it in order. The first thing is the cannon,
Yeah.
right? Bring in, do you have this man's name? I remember it being really funny.
John Morrison, the cannon expert in Virginia. Is that who we're talking
I
about?
don't think it's Morrison. Or no. I'm thinking you're right. There's two guys. Okay, the first one.
The first one I just wanted to have a moment on just because one, they say he owns over 100 cannons,
Yes.
which what a collection. But
Yes.
two, they talk about all this like safety procedure that they need to do. And then the camera cuts around and they're just firing a cannon right at a minivan.
It's a neighborhood.
It's just a neighbor in rural Virginia,
It's a street.
dude's front yard
He has neighbors
who come over and video it.
who are charmed by this behavior.
Yes.
We're just like, oh, that's old Jim.
That guy just moved in the neighborhood. He has to be new and it's like still charming to him.
Yes.
After
yeah.
about 100 cannon shots, he's like, oh God.
Apparently they don't have HOA in West Virginia.
yeah.
Bless them.
Yeah.
But no, A, that there would be a canon expert. B, that they had
course.
to travel to this, like, yeah, in the whole state of California, there wasn't a dude with a bunch of cannons.
Well, probably like California laws. It might be
Oh.
more difficult in California. I don't know.
Well, especially if you want to, do it in a neighborhood.
Yeah, especially when you do it at a minivan.
Yeah, I
That takes some southern permission structure right there.
yes,
in order
yes,
to
it
get
really
that
does.
done.
Yes, it really does. But I was also amused that he seems to be like a hobbyist. Like
Yes.
like his occupation was not canon. His pleasure was canon. And I love that distinction.
I don't know what a professional cannoneer would be in 2003.
I don't know. They make cannons or something, man. Tell me people don't need cannons. You're telling me nowhere in the world does anybody need a cannon right now?
Somebody made all those cannons in his collection, so I guess that's a good point.
There you go. There you go. Yeah, like antique. Like I that's more what I meant. Is I was expecting him to be like a historian of, and it seemed like just like him.
No, they just go boom and it's fun.
They go, but I mean, he's not wrong.
No, it's
like,
great.
especially when they were like firing the hole and they like lower they got that like boomstick thing.
Yeah.
It's great.
It's great.
Looked great. Sounded great. I understand why that dude is videotaping. I would be annoyed, but I get it.
Also,
I get
the
it.
size of his camera, I was like, this really is transporting me to 2003.
The size of his camera, but also the size of the cannon is hilarious.
Oh,
It's
yes.
so small.
It's adorable.
Like, it's just
Especially compared to where they're going in
like
this.
shoot a little golf ball out of that.
Yeah.
Although what they do is like he's shooting blanks, and it appears to be just like a ball of tinfoil.
That's the gunpowder. I think that's actually the gunpowder.
Oh, it's white.
What? I thought there was like gunpowder packed into a cup in tinfoil and then they shoved that down.
That may be the case.
But I don't know how to make explosives and I'm not going to tell people on a podcast.
Well, no, this is not the Anarchist Cookbook. That took me too long. If you could cut out some of the time there, make me sound a bit smarter, that'd be great for me. No, but then putting together. I love the second guy that they go to. Once they're actually making the cannon,
Oh, yes.
technically the third, there is a tree guy's like, that's a big tree, and that's from England. And they're like, we'll take it.
We'll take
and
the
then
tree.
that's the whole scene. But the next guy, they're like, we need help. Like, what do you call it?
They had to band it. They had to
Bandit.
put the
Bandit.
bands around.
I wanted to say bind. Bandit. Like you would like a barrel. And the dude that they go to comes up on a skateboard.
He's so cool.
Dude. But he kind of was.
Yeah,
like
he
that.
was.
Like
He was.
that's the
Like, I
they
wanted-
introduced exactly.
I wanted to hate him, and I kind of couldn't.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Because he was just kind of chill as hell, dude.
Yeah.
Like, whatever. Oh, you boys want to put some bands around here? Okay, all right.
Do this every week, man. What's up?
Yeah. It was like a Rob Dyrdek that you can like. You know? Like,
It was interesting there when they got to that sequence and they're putting the bands around the cannon. I think this speaks well to the way that the myth unfolded and being able to take the journey with them.
yeah.
It was actually during this sequence they're putting the bands around and they're showing how difficult it was. I made the note. I was like, one night? I was like, this is where I started to think, like, I don't think this could be done in one night.
Okay.
And then the episode goes there, which was
Yes.
interesting. It was
Yeah.
like, oh, okay, I actually was a little bit ahead of the show, which in this case is a good thing to me.
You were, but interestingly enough, on a different step. Because
Yeah.
you were saying that
Yeah,
about
yeah,
like that the banding would take forever, which I think Adam also comments on, like, ye old like methodology. It takes ye old a hell of a lot of time or something like that.
Yeah.
But it was the cannonball
Yeah.
where Jamie calls it.
Well, when they start, initially it's when they're starting, they have that, make that amazing spoon drill thing, and he's trying to drill out the barrel.
You're right.
Which
You're
I loved.
totally right.
We got a little bit of fun sass from the narrator. It's been a while since we had a good Robert Lee moment, but there's just great times where he gets to kind of chime in and make the point that he's like the Han Solo. Like
Yes.
he's pointing out, like, this is ridiculous,
Yeah.
isn't it? And when Jamie's making the hand drill off of like a photo of a 1,000-year-old toolbox and all this like craziness that no one else would do,
Yeah.
the narrator said,
It's the best medieval drill Jamie's made all day.
his delivery is so good.
I mean, he's not wrong. It is only the best one that he's made today.
I just love the all day. Like, perfectly normal.
I love that but here's where I'm going to disagree, because Jamie has a tough time with it. And it looks, I mean, it looks terrible.
It looks awful.
Like
I started to
the
like
job.
I started to get tight, like watching it just like that. Oh, I can't
like
imagine.
you just do it around and around, and I mean, it's exactly what it sounds like. It looks like a spoon with like a tip at the end, and you just kind of drill into it very
Just
slow.
going.
And he says, "No way," but Cliff, you have a whole village.
True.
So if you have like dudes switching off like a lot, coming at it from both ends, I don't know. I don't know.
They also didn't really go into like what they based the size of the cannon on.
True.
You know, theoretically, I guess you could make a smaller cannon.
Also, no offense to Jamie or anything, but like one would think that a Hungarian carpenter by trade might be able to do that a bit longer and faster and more efficiently than I think.
I do think, though, there's something.
I think they just called it too early.
Well, there's something in the spirit of the myth, though, that implies that the people who are making this cannon were not prepared.
That's true.
If they needed to make this thing overnight, like, would they just have everything sitting around prepared to do all this, or would they be having to start from scratch like Mythbusters did? You know, in which maybe they don't have to make the tools; they would have those sitting around. But like, I don't know. I was actually really with them when Jamie made the call early to say, "Yeah, I think this is busted," just on the practicality of doing this on the kind of time frame that the myth states. Like, I don't think it's ridiculous that they, you know, could have made a cannon using the ancient tools. It's specifically the time basis that got called out.
I still think if I just don't think it's out of the realm of possibility.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like I'll grant unlikely, right? I'll grant like that's a really short amount of time. Like, what? How are we judging night here? You know, like
Yeah.
what did night begin at 3 p.m. and end the next day at 5? You're like, what?
Yeah.
But you know, I get it.
They do once again in Mythbusters fashion decide their first test of their medieval gunpowder is going to take place indoors.
I noticed that as well. Even though it was a blank, I was just like, but you're testing for the possibility that the thing just blows up altogether. So
Right.
Like, what?
And you also just recently shot a fluorescent tube out of your shop with a penny gun. This is about an order of magnitude larger. Like
a little bit.
Wouldn't you think maybe don't do that?
But this is where we get. Do you have this man's name?
I don't.
I believe it's Rick Morocco. Because they're like, now over to Rick Morocco, like explosive expert. I'm like, sure.
And they use like multiple
kind of Ocean's 11-esque.
They use multiple explosives experts and they don't explain it. They're just like a different explosive expert. I'm like, what happened to the first guy?
Okay, but that one was hilarious because he's only brought in at the 11th hour. Like they do the thing and it works. And then they're like, and this is our friend that's going to blow it up for us. I was like, I brought 5 pounds.
Yeah, we called Uncle Bob. He's going to come in and blow it up for us. I did have the thought to your point about, the feasibility of this and the differences with how this would really be done. I also think on the blowing up the cannon part of it, there's also just a very good chance that if you were to make a cannon overnight or you were to make a cannon with ancient tools, that you would not do as good of a job. They wouldn't maybe they wouldn't put bands around it. Maybe they wouldn't, that technology existed. That's like cooperage, barrel making, basic stuff. But if they're in a rush, they just don't.
Cooperage.
They just don't. Thank you. I know a lot about bourbon. That's purely where that comes from.
Fair enough.
But yeah, I mean, they probably would not have done as thorough of a job, which also would lead to the explosive problems.
Well, right. And especially if it was done in one night. Mistakes were probably made, like
it's designing Rock Ridge and forgetting the people. Can't do it all in one night.
Can't do it all in one night. Also, imagine trying to get that thing perfectly straight so that a rock ball goes through it.
That was one of the things that was making my head hurt when they were drilling the barrel because they've already gone through all the work of putting the bands on everything. And I was like, if you slip, if you get off, like, that kind of work, like, freaks me out just because it's got to work the first time or you're in trouble,
or you're back to square one. You have to go back to Tree Guy and be like, do you have any more of that English one? It's like, no, I gave you the English one.
We also got here something that even amazed Adam, which was Jamie making a cannonball out of granite by hand.
I mean, that's
just chiseling it away.
That is an insane sentence, especially when you see it and it's just like a perfect sphere. And you're a crazy person.
How?
Yeah.
And Jamie's just like, oh, I didn't know I could do that.
Yeah.
I'm like, what?
It's like, well, it took a really long time, but looks good, right? It's like, yeah.
Yeah.
Freaking Michelangelo. Yeah, it looks real good.
Yeah. Good God. It goes back to that, just like there's no two other people on the planet who could do this the way that they did. Nope. And it makes it so watchable the entire time. One of my notes was just like, it'll never not be fun to watch them make stuff.
That's true.
Like like you said, like the myth kind of whatever at this point. I want to see see them make it.
This whole myth was just making stuff. Making stuff and then big boom.
Yeah. And that actually, to the point of the big boom, was a note that I made where Adam says something that I was like, I don't know that this has been established in Mythbusters canon, no pun intended, but feels like a definite thing where he says at one point, of course we're going to try to blow it up. That's what we do.
I did notice that.
And I was like, okay, in the show, in the run of the show that we've seen, like, that hasn't really been, you've had some explosions, but the notion of like, we're known for blowing stuff up.
Yeah, like, don't you worry your pretty little hearts. We're going to get to it. That thing we do. That
hasn't really been in the show up till this point. And that's when I started to realize, like, is this our first real Mythbusters blows crap up kind of episode? And it was.
I think it would have, I think it has to be because it's definitely the first time that they're like, all right, we tested the thing. Let's just
blow it up.
Let's just see some explosions.
It was also immediately following that. It was like hit after hit in terms of like classic Mythbusters because now we're back at the Alameda runway once again.
Yeah,
We've seen it once before in the season, but it just every time they're here, it's like that's Mythbusters. That's every bit as Mythbusters as like M5.
Now, what shocked me about this is that they fired it twice. Mark me, twice.
Yeah.
Before blowing it up.
Yes.
That was a lot of work.
Well,
to only do it twice.
Twice that we saw, I guess.
No.
Did they say?
It had to be twice because they fired the cannonball that took him all night to make.
Oh, that's true.
So they only had one shot, and then they were unable to recover it.
Maybe they had more of tennis balls so they could shoot flaming tennis balls.
That's
down
fair.
That was pretty satisfying.
That was very satisfying.
They said it was like a quarter, or was it? I have it written down, 1.25 miles long, their stretch of runway, and that tennis ball got to the end of the runway. It was unbelievable.
Something to them trees.
Yeah.
Them tree cannons.
No joke. It was amazing to watch. And then when they do the actual cannonball, it just disappears.
Gone.
Just gone.
Just home run, baby.
I assume maybe
Never
in
see
the
it
water, because there's like water beyond the end of the runway, maybe, but who knows? Or it hit somewhere and pulverized and it was just gone. I don't know.
That just goes across the sound and it just like hits a windshield.
Well,
Somebody's firing cannons.
later seasons of Mythbusters, that joke won't be as funny.
Or it could be funnier, depending on how you look at it.
Yeah.
Do you have Mythbusters insurance?
People who lived around
My name's Squee.
people who live around Alameda have to get special insurance just in case.
Just in case they have to get Jamie Adam insurance.
Yes. Yeah. Heinemann Savage Insurance Agency.
Ooh, not bad. Not a bad idea.
Yeah. And as you said, it's almost immediately like, okay, we did it. It's a good cannon. 5 pounds of explosives. Seal the end. Let's blow this sucker up.
5 pounds.
Unreal.
And they cap it.
And there's something we mentioned this on I think it was actually during Buried Alive. We talked about this too, where the show feels, it's obviously professional and they are taking security precautions and all that.
Yeah.
But the show itself, the production feels like rough and tumble enough that this feels extra dangerous and exciting. Because like you notice the blast shield wasn't even tall enough to stand behind.
Yeah.
They're all like crouched behind the blast shield. And they're like, well, on this one, everybody needs to get behind something. So Adam's just on a tractor with a scoop, like this will protect me.
Yeah.
It was like, oh my God, you guys really didn't think about where everybody was going to go when you blew this thing up.
Well, I just don't know that they really took the 5 pounds to heart, because
Yeah.
they're like, it went really far. It's like, well, you put 5 pounds of gunpowder.
That might have been too much.
That's a lot.
And with the high-speed shot, we mentioned this already, but the high-speed shot when the cannon blows up, those huge, it's not even the cannon, it's the
base.
It's the base, those big like yard timbers or whatever that just come flying at the camera. I had actually forgotten, because they used that shot so much, that in the full version, it knocks the camera over.
Yes.
Like that was really cool to see the full shot and just see the whole camera go down in the process, because you're used to seeing the explosion part, not the aftermath. But it's a classic Mythbusters shot. It's amazing.
It definitely had some like Project Trinity vibes.
Yeah,
like,
right.
Oh, that's a big one.
That's a really big one. And like the camera is, when one of the shots, the cameraman is like moving to get, it's like Zapruder film. Like it's like this weird like boom and all the smoke's going. It just feels chaotic and
it
crazy.
just goes so much higher. Like the plume.
Yeah.
I just did not anticipate a plumage of that size. And then also the splintering.
Oh my God.
The splintering
everywhere, all down the runway, and just, oh my God.
And in slow motion.
Yes. Yeah, it's great. It's what this is an instance of, this is why you do this myth, and it's worth it to see that happen. And they don't actually, it's interesting, they don't actually do a verdict on this one, because Jamie has already said it's busted like halfway through. So they don't even do like we're at the end, we're going to recap. Yep, this is busted. They just kind of let it go. I think they end with the boom.
I was so pleased with the boom, I don't think I noticed.
Right. And
the only thing that I noticed was like there were 8 minutes left and still a myth.
Yeah. Well, and that's where we touched on this in the open. I've started thinking about the format of the show.
Yeah.
There's a lot of like science and thought that goes into time slots on traditional television and what you put on at what time and whatever. I wonder, I don't know what time of night Mythbusters aired. I assume it's like prime time, like 8 o'clock or something. But I wonder if they were intentionally structuring their shows to put the biggest thing essentially at the end of the second act, so to speak, because after that people trail off because they're going to bed or something. Like I wonder if it feels intentional.
They're definitely following like the SNL model of like the skits we're not perfectly sure about go at the end.
Exactly. Yeah. It's interesting. It feels very intentional, and it's not what I would necessarily think to do. Like you said, save the explosion for the end. Like make that the thing. Myth 3, beat the breath test. The question is pretty simple. Can you fool a breathalyzer?
Do you think there was tomfoolery involved in this one?
So,
you know what I mean by that?
Exactly. Yeah. I know that this is a myth that I think gets brought up fairly often in like Mythbusters history, because everybody says, well, if they did find something, they're not going to let them put it on TV.
Right.
And I think Adam and Jamie have said publicly, no, like this was done legit. And there was only one myth, and it involved RFID on credit cards, that they were actually prevented from even testing lest they reveal something in the process. And that's much later. Yeah. But I think this comes up in that because they were like, no. Like, if we were allowed to do the breath test, we were allowed to do these other things. Like that was normal. There was only one thing that stopped us, and that came much later. So the official line is that this is all legit. To be fair, though, there are ways around that. And I did think about that as they went through of like everything they were testing was pretty clear it wasn't going to work.
Yeah.
There wasn't anything, and I don't know what I haven't heard of other breathalyzer, beat the breathalyzer methodologies are out there. I have either. And they make the point that it ultimately doesn't matter anyway, because you're going to do a blood test to verify, and it doesn't matter. Right. But there could have been a little bit of producing magic in that to go, the results are going to be legit, but we're also going to test the things that we think we can say publicly.
Yeah.
Who knows?
Yeah. Because, they also went, there was, and I do think it's fair in this instance, because the police department was letting them use their equipment and their manpower and like what have you. Fair. You can slip a little bit of like, I hesitate to even call it propaganda, because it's like, I don't want people drunk driving.
I was gonna say,
like a little PSA action is totally cool on this
of
one.
Of all the government conspiracy theories, the government doesn't want us to drive drunk. It's not really one that bothers me.
Good. Like, okay. Oh, right on. So it's working.
Yeah, good. Yeah. I'm in on that. I did have a thought. Did you know how breathalyzers work?
No idea.
I had no clue. When they first mentioned this thing about, it analyzed the breath and the alcohol content in your breath is similar to your bloodstream.
Yeah.
I wrote down, is that true? And I looked it up because I was like, that sounds ridiculous to me.
I took their word for it. But
that's totally how breathalyzers work. And I was just like, that's far more simple than I thought. I don't know what I thought a breathalyzer tested for.
I don't either.
But that was just interesting. I realized watching this, I have no idea how this works.
Well, and I also didn't really know that it was supposed to like, well, no, I guess I did know those, the blood alcohol content. I had just never really put together that, like, how are they getting a blood test out of a breathalyzer?
Right, exactly.
Like I had never put two and two together.
Yeah.
It was interesting. One thing I do want to say, because they were also talking about how, like you were saying, they're going to actually do a blood test, which would confirm so this wouldn't matter. But also there are like certain sobriety tests.
Yeah.
I will say, don't drunk drive, nothing like that. Some of the sobriety tests I don't think I could do right now.
Same. I had the exact same thought.
Do the alphabet backwards. It's like, oh, no way.
Nope.
No way.
No, I can't do that stone cold sober.
Z, Y, X. Maybe.
There's two of us and we can't do it.
Yeah.
Are we drunk? Oh, God.
the truth comes out. It's all been a ruse. It's a bourbon podcast.
Yeah. Well, Cooperage kid did come up. So, hey, if this doesn't work out, we'll just transition. Yeah. No, I had the exact same thought. I mean, I have heard also that some of those field sobriety tests are really more about like what they're really looking for is your behavior.
Yes.
Less so than the test itself.
Then like, can you do the thing?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And there was like a famous video that went viral a few years ago that I love of a cop asking someone like, hey, can you, whatever it is, like, can you walk in a straight line and touch your nose? And the guy goes, no. The cop goes, why? And he goes, 'cause I'm drunk. So I think there's also something just to the psychology of doing the test in the first place.
That's fair.
Is revealing.
That's perfectly.
But yeah, I would be terrified because they seem hard. They seem like they require, coordination, which I don't possess in the best of days.
But that's such a good point because I've also never heard. I mean, I presume it's happened at least once, but like I've never heard of anybody being like, yeah, I got pulled over and I wasn't drinking, but I had to like do the test.
Right. Yeah, I've never heard about like a surprise.
No, yeah. Like, oh,
pop
actually,
quiz.
you need to, yeah. But
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure it happens.
Yeah.
I'm sure it happens.
Everyone I know who has ever had to use a breathalyzer or gotten a DUI deserved it. So, and these are my friends.
I don't,
but they did the thing.
I more think about breathalyzers in terms now of like the court ordered ones where like
in your car.
Yeah. Like that's more what I think of than, because also, I mean, they had like a big old machine.
Oh yeah.
That's not been I mean, it's like a handheld thing is what I've seen.
Yeah.
Okay. But it could also, I can see a scenario where like the handheld is not as reliable.
Well, they actually mentioned, I thought this was a cool part of the methodology, something that was missing from the cola myth last week was they actually talk about the different technologies in different breathalyzers and that there are different, some of the different things they test, like the battery, for instance, is supposed to have electrical interference,
right?
Because there's one breathalyzer that relies more on that, and there's one breathalyzer that relies more. I don't know how they didn't really go into how it was supposed to work, but the denture cream was supposed to work to a very specific type of test.
I don't think that's true. I think Adam just wanted to have silly teeth and give us his best Austin Powers impression. That's what I think was going on there. I don't think there was any veracity to.
But it was great. They talked about the fact they're different.
That one Reddit user that's like, but they didn't try the dental cream. I'm telling you guys.
It works every time. My grandmother has never gotten a DUI.
Not once. You think she's playing bridge without her gin and juice? You out of your mind, friend. You're out of your mind.
The fun part of this you talked about earlier was they just got to do a sequence of Adam and Jamie getting wasted.
It was glorious.
And
it was glorious.
They go in, again, I'm not complaining here because we always say we want more science and it was great, but they go into like, oh, their body weight and they can only metabolize this much and they can blah, blah, blah. So to do it safely, they have to drink. And then they go, okay, we've had 13 drinks over 3 hours. And I was like, my God.
They really, I'm glad you brought that up because then when they blew, I was like, that's not that high.
Yeah.
Like, I really thought that it was going to be a lot higher.
Well, it seems like they were doing it with food. They were like,
you're right.
They were doing things to not make themselves sick or get alcohol poisoning in the process.
Yeah.
So they were doing it in a more measured way. So it took a lot more alcohol to get them to where they got in the end.
But I love that both of them react in the ways that you would absolutely expect.
Adam is silly and Jamie is Jamie.
Stone cold.
He's just Jamie.
He's just Jamie. And always will be, and no factors will change that or cause any kind of response.
I'm starting to feel it.
Good
Lord.
I love, because you know that at least like part of it has to be played up and a bit of an act, but at the same time, then Adam goes into the whole thing about like, well, he's leaner and has like more muscle mass than I do. So
Yeah.
like he's actually going to be able to imbibe it better. And then it's true.
Yes.
Like,
It is completely true.
He can scientifically better handle his booze than you.
And he's just scientifically a different creature than most human beings on the planet.
He's special. He's a national hero.
To run through some of the things that they tested, they start out with breath mints, which there were none of these, by the way. I guess if we want to talk about registering a guest, there were none of these that seemed plausible to me.
No.
I mean, this seemed from the beginning like, yeah, no, this ain't gonna work. But
I did think the mouthwash was going to do something, and we'll get there. But
yeah,
that was the only because I was like, well, that would make your more alcohol might register than I would think.
exactly.
Like,
And it
I
seemed
mean, what do I know?
And that did seem to happen. They had the one test that was way off, but even
Spiked,
but
yeah.
even the second test, I think, if I remember correctly, was elevated.
It was a bit higher.
It was
it
still-
was like 1.6 versus the like 1.2s that he was registering 1.1.
Yeah.
Or
But the-
point
1.1. He's dead. He's dead if it's 1.1.
point 1. 1.1.
He is a bottle of Jack Daniels if it's 1.1. He's just fully become.
Just Adam Walker.
They do breath mints. They do the battery, as we mentioned. The battery was the one thing that stood out to me, and it's purely my dumb brain. I'm just like, that seems sciencey.
Sure, yeah. It's like there's like
Electrical
acid stuff, and yeah,
sure. Pennies. Back to pennies. They love pennies
Now,
on
but
the
putting
show.
a battery in your mouth, that's another thing that I can recall being not afraid of, but just like, oh, you don't
And of course, it's Adam that does it immediately.
naturally.
Just boop.
Naturally. Just pops it in there.
Toddler strikes again.
Yep.
Pennies, as we mentioned, dentures and denture cream, which was just for the wonderful hillbilly jokes. The mouthwash made more sense to me, though, because I know people who will keep mouthwash in their car, and I can see you getting pulled over and being like, oh no, and just shoving mouthwash in your mouth to try to get rid of it.
But more for the smell, I would think.
Well, exactly, because you
know?
don't want the cop to smell it on your breath, but then it actually makes the breath test worse, which is
like
kinda
significantly.
funny. Yeah, like significantly worse. That's kind of funny. So that one was actually an interesting result in that respect. But this is then where Adam mentions the blood test of like, well, even if you fool the breathalyzer or if they don't smell it on you, there's other ways that we can do this.
Right.
None of this is really gonna matter
Right.
or get you. This is busted all the way up and down the table.
Yeah.
But
And they were very explicit about that.
yes.
Which, I mean, they had to be.
Yeah.
But I mean, it gave us Jamie saying, Adam, the officer says you need to drink more, which is just the best.
I do want to see a version of Mythbusters where that cop is the third Mythbuster who's just there like a father,
Just shaking his head. Just, I'm too old for this.
Oh, he retired the next day. He was this is what it's become.
You can take my gun, my badge, my honor, my time, my dignity.
I've given most of it today anyway.
That man, savage, took it. Jamie, you were there too. I didn't say anything. But I don't trust you.
But it was creepy. It was creepy. You should have been saying something. That's why that made it worse somehow.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, this is busted across the board. I really enjoyed this one as kind of a series of mini myths. I thought it was actually really fun, even though it doesn't have.
Well, especially compared to the Coke one.
Oh, yeah. It had a lot more going on and was way more interesting than that. It goes back to just the question is more interesting.
Yes.
The question of cola was, can cola do stuff?
Yeah.
The notion of a breathalyzer and beating this test, there's like stakes to that.
Yeah.
That made it a lot more interesting. So on the whole, I really liked it. But this was a good episode, man. I
thought it was one of the better ones.
Yeah, I think we got three very different myths. We got a little bit of everything that people love about the show. It was a nice hodgepodge and a nice bounce back from last week, which again makes me just go back to like, how was this made? What was going on at the time? How is it so inconsistent week to week? It's very interesting.
Especially since I felt there were a decent amount of parallels between this one and last week, where it was like
Absolutely.
Similarly structured, almost testing for similar things, and it was just like, I don't know, taking out the gross out element was just all it took for me.
And getting a little bit more technical with it.
That's
actually
true.
making
That's
a meal
true.
out of what's in front of them as opposed to just, it's like we said last week, you could take those same myths and just approach them differently and it would be more like this,
Yes.
because you could actually break them down and actually go through. That's the detail, the specificity is what made it so good to me.
Yeah. And that cop forever.
But we will be back next week with yet another episode. We'll be talking about season 1, episode 10. The myths are Stinky Car
Oh, God.
and Raccoon Rocket. I remember Stinky Car, if it's the one I'm thinking about, being one of the grossest moments in the history of the show.
Well, great. I go in for that. I wasn't literally just saying
It's
how
gonna be
gross out is not for me.
That's gonna be your new favorite episode.
I can't. Well, look, if Rocket Raccoon is not them tying a literal rocket to a raccoon, I'm not sure I want in.
Poodle myth all over again, man. They're gonna tease us and then not do it.
They might.
But we hope you will watch along with us and then come back and listen to us break it down. As always, we're looking forward to it.
Come on back now, y'all. Try This at Home is produced by Slugline Media. The show is written, hosted, edited, and shot onto the internet by Cliff Baumgartner and Harrison Stewart. Our music is by the mysterious Breakmaster Cylinder. You can follow the show on Instagram at TryThisPod or email us trythisathomepod@gmail.com.